I was still wearing the satin hairpins from the rehearsal dinner when the world split in two, the life I had been promised and the life I would now have to survive. The tuxedo rentals were due back, the venue deposit was gone, and my bouquet, those pale, hopeful peonies, was already browning in a kitchen trash can that didn't belong to me anymore. Hours earlier, I'd believed love was a door that opened into a room where everyone kept their vows. By nightfall, I was a woman with a swollen belly and nowhere to sleep, gauze-tied feet aching inside borrowed flats, balancing my future on 2 shoulder bags and a rideshare driver's pity. It happened fast, but it didn't feel fast. It felt like someone started pulling a thread at the hem of my life and wouldn't stop until they unraveled the whole dress. The man I trusted, Callum, whose laugh had once been the password to my calm, took the ring back with legal words and empty apologies, said there'd been misunderstandings, said his mother had concerns, said he'd arrange support, but couldn't proceed with a union clouded by doubt. Doubt of what? Of me, of this baby, of whether I fit neatly into the family photo etched in his mother's mind. He left before the cake tasting. His silence afterward was so loud I could hear it through closed doors. I didn't have keys to our apartment anymore because the lease was never in your name, and the credit card used for the caterer had security flags, and my phone lit up with declined transactions like blinking buoys in a black ocean. I dialed my grandparents' landline with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, the number muscle memory from childhood summers when my biggest worry was losing at hide-and-seek in the orchard. "Come home," Grandpa Walter said, voice gravel and warmth. "No questions tonight. Just come." The bus station smelled like wet newspapers and disappointment. A woman with a purple scarf pressed a half sleeve of crackers into my palm, without making it a big deal. The ticket agent glanced at my belly and gave me an aisle seat without asking. On the ride, the highway unspooled like a long confession. Each exit whispered a different life I might have had if I'd turned off earlier, if I'd seen the warning signs sooner, if I'd trusted the way my chest tightened whenever Callum's phone disappeared face down under napkins. Dawn draped itself over the town where I learned to ride a bike and keep secrets. The farmhouse stood at the end of a gravel driveway that remembered every tire that had ever passed over it. Grandma Lila was on the porch in her robe, steam curling up from 2 mugs. She didn't hug me right away. She looked. She saw. Then she wrapped me in the smell of lemon soap and bread flour and said, "You're safe." I slept in the room with the slanted ceiling and the wallpaper sprinkled with tiny blue forget-me-nots. The house sighed around me, old wood settling, clock ticking, the world not asking for anything. But I didn't feel safe. Safety is never a room. It's a promise you test every hour. I ran my fingers over my belly and said, "I've got you," because I couldn't say we're okay yet. I'd have to earn that. When I woke to the sound of the mail slot clacking open, I thought about how yesterday I'd been practicing my vows, and today I was practicing how to breathe through shame. Shame has a taste, tinny, like you've been biting a penny. It has a temperature, cold, like someone left a window open in December. It has a sound, footsteps slowing when you walk by. I went downstairs. On the kitchen table, beside a bowl of peaches, lay a thin, official envelope with my name on it, my maiden name, the one I'd planned to learn to miss. The return address was a law firm I didn't recognize. I told myself it was a mix-up. I told myself not to open it yet. I told myself a lot of gentle lies to keep breathing. Grandma slid a plate of eggs in front of me and said, "You're home. That's step 1. But even homes cast shadows, and in ours, secrets stacked like crates in the cellar. My grandparents kept them because that's what their generation did, fold the truth into the laundry and hope the stain wouldn't show. I had kept mine for love, and Callum kept his because that's how people keep power when they're afraid of losing it. I didn't know then that the letter would detonate our carefully arranged past. I didn't know it would make me question who I was, who I belonged to, and why the road had curved me back to this porch. I didn't know the story I thought I'd been living was only the prologue to something much darker and more honest. I didn't know the worst was waiting on the other side of a seal I hadn't broken yet, but the worst was still to come. Let me introduce myself before the rumors do it for me. My name is Mara. I'm 26. I used to be very good at believing what I wanted to be true. I grew up in a town where the air smells like damp leaves in September and diesel in June, in a farmhouse built by hands that didn't believe in shortcuts. My grandparents, Walter and Lila, raised my mother, raised me when my mother couldn't, and now, they are making room for one more heartbeat that thuds beside mine whenever I get too still. If you're watching this, If you're reading me with your eyes and not your assumptions, I need you to do something. I need you to tell me where you are. Type it in the comments. Your city, your kitchen, your hospital break room at 3 a.m., your car parked behind a grocery store because that's where the Wi-Fi is generous. Tell me where you are and what the air smells like right now. Tell me so I know I'm not talking into a canyon where only my fear echoes back. And subscribe, not because my life is entertainment, but because I am building something here. A place where women who have been told to be quiet can come and be loud. A place where shame faintly remembers our names but cannot spell them anymore. When I returned to my grandparents' house, everything was exactly as memory had left it, and absolutely different. The living room walls still wore the family photos like medals, Grandpa in his Navy uniform, Grandma in her wedding dress, my mother in that red sweater from a Christmas where we pretended the tree lights could cure anything. But the sofa sagged a little more. The floorboards creaked at new pitches. The kitchen radio hummed a station that played oldies like lullabies. Time had drawn its lines, and we had learned not to argue with its pen. I had to relearn the choreography of humility. I had to ask where the spare towels were. I had to measure my belly against doorways to see if I fit. The bathroom mirror told the truth even when I didn't want it. My face looked older, not because of years, but because of what those years had asked me to carry. I had made myself small for a man who wanted to be big, and then he had left me alone with the space he took up. Grandma was gentle in the ways that matter. She left a glass of water by my bed every night. She never asked me to explain anything before I was ready. When she did ask, she asked like a person opening a window, not a person interrogating a suspect. Grandpa moved slower than I remembered, but spoke with the same weathered certainty. "We'll figure it out," he said, the way some men say grace. I wish I could tell you I came home to unconditional safety, and that was the end. I wish I could tell you love is a blanket that covers every draft. But houses have thin walls, walls that carry voices from one room to another when people think they're alone. I heard my grandparents murmuring about money, about rising property taxes, about the tractor that coughed more than it hummed. I heard them say my name, pause, and then say, "We'll make do." Make do is a beautiful phrase and a cruel one. It promises survival. It never promises dignity. I opened the envelope on the second night because I wanted to sleep without its shape pressing against my mind. Inside was a letter that used words like outstanding, liability, and impending. It said I had co-signed a line of credit with Callum, that the balance was past due, that failure to resolve the matter could impact property placed as contingent collateral. I read it 4 times before I understood the part that had my lungs locking. The property listed as collateral was my grandparents' house. I didn't remember signing anything like that. I remembered a stack of papers at a notary when we changed the wedding venue, a rushed morning where the caterer needed a deposit, and the florist couldn't hold the date. I remembered Callum's hand on the small of my back, his voice in my ear saying, "Just sign where I put the sticky flags, babe. It's standard. My family's attorney prepared it." I remembered thinking, "You're marrying him. This is normal. Married people co-sign things. Love is trust, and trust is paperwork, and paperwork is boring. Boring can be lethal." I told my grandparents, and their faces arranged themselves into that brave, neutral mask older people wear when they're protecting you from their panic. Grandma said, "We'll call them in the morning." Grandpa said, "This is a misunderstanding." I said, "Of course," because I wanted my voice to be a bridge to the shore where everything is fine. But the truth was, a storm wave with its own ideas. If you've made it this far, if you've felt your stomach drop in time with mine, I need you to hit subscribe. I need you in the comments. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if your walls are thin too. Tell me if your love story also required a translator who never showed up. I'm going to tell you what happened next, exactly as it happened. I'm not going to spare myself, and I'm not going to spare anyone who taught me to doubt my own eyes. I'm going to tell you the parts that gelled my blood, and the parts that exploded whatever illusions I had left. Because after that letter, we learned something even uglier. The bank wasn't the only one who wanted a piece of our nights. And that was when I understood that coming home isn't the same as being safe, but the worst was still to come. Morning brought a polite woman on the phone with a voice that smiled. Her name was Sheila. She said things like, "Let's resolve this together," and "I understand your concern, Mara." I told her I was pregnant, and that there must be a mistake. She paused in a way that made me think she was writing "pregnant" in the margin, not for sympathy, but for file completeness. The documents show your electronic signature and your in-person acknowledgement at a notary on May 14th, she said. The collateral clause was initialed M. Harrow. That's your name, correct? Harrow. My mother's name. My grandparents' name. She had me dead to rights. I hung up and dry-heaved into the kitchen sink, while the faucet hissed like it was judging me. Grandma rubbed my back and said, "We'll get a lawyer." Grandpa took out the old metal file box where he kept every utility bill and warranty since 1982. He liked to hold paper in his hands because that meant it was real. "We'll find the seams," he said. "Every mess has seams." We couldn't afford a lawyer with mahogany shelves and a skyline view. We found a man in a second-floor office over a coffee shop, a man with sleeves that had been rolled so many times the cuffs had given up. His name was Thomas. He listened like he was taking dictation for a future I couldn't see yet. He said, "It's not hopeless." He also said, "It's not simple." He explained how cosigners are fairy tales until they're not, how collateral can be the ring you didn't know you were wearing. He asked if I'd ever been pressured to sign anything by my fiancé or his family. I laughed in a way that wasn't laughter. "Always," I said. Thomas sent letters. He said words like injunction and contest. He told me not to contact Callum directly. I contacted Callum directly. "You dragged my grandparents' house into your mess," I texted. He responded with a long paragraph about miscommunication, and my mother handled the financing, and this is being blown out of proportion. I told him proportion is what you lose when your past due balance becomes the only language anyone speaks to you in. That week, the town remembered I was back. Small towns have a way of putting your life up on a bulletin board without your permission. At the grocery store, eyes landed on my belly and then darted away like the glance had burned them. The pharmacy clerk put prenatal vitamins in a brown bag as if they were contraband. At church on Sunday, the same woman who'd complimented my engagement ring last year squeezed my hand and said, "God has a plan," in the same tone people use when they don't know whether to pray for you or warn their children about you. I began to wake each night at 2:13 a.m. It was always 2:13. The house sounded different at that hour. The refrigerator cycling, the pine branches tapping the window, Grandpa's cough in the next room, the highway like a far river. The baby turned and turned as if she were refolding herself into the smallest shape possible, trying to reduce her footprint in a world that kept measuring her. I whispered stories into the dark, how her great-grandfather taught me to tune a radio by listening for the song beneath the static, how her great-grandmother baked bread that made the whole house rise with it. "You come from makers," I told her, "not takers. Remember." Callum's mother, Elaine, called me from a number I didn't recognize. Her voice was a blade wrapped in lace. "It would be best if you stopped spreading lies," she said. "Your situation is unfortunate, but my son is not the villain in your melodrama." I told her about the collateral clause. She said, "If you signed, it's on you." I said, "I was promised protection." She said, "You were promised nothing we signed." Then, as if remembering some finishing school script, she added, "And I hope the child is healthy. The way one might say, I hope the weather cooperates for the garden party." The bank posted a notice. It wasn't an eviction. Not yet. It was a warning wearing a suit. We had 60 days to make a plan. 60 days measured in prenatal appointments and legal filings and my grandparents' thrift. 60 days that crept by on some afternoons and sprinted like panicked deer on others. Thomas arranged a meeting with a junior associate from the firm that represented the credit line. She introduced herself as Avery and wore a brooch that looked like a small planet. "We can discuss alternative arrangements," she said, which is legal for, "You may beg now." We begged. We offered partial payments. We offered to refinance. We offered time I didn't have. Avery's face remained in that neutral setting they must teach in law school. "Submit your proposal in writing," she said. "Decisions are above my level." Above my level. I wondered how high the levels went, and whether anyone up there remembered that a house can be a person's anchor, not just a line on a spreadsheet. Then came the first revelation in the cascade. Thomas called after office hours. "I pulled records around that notary appointment," he said. The notary logged 2 documents. One was the credit line. The second was a guardianship designation in the event of your incapacitation. "My what?" I asked, heat climbing my neck. "It names Elaine as temporary guardian for your child if you are incapacitated. It's not binding without other conditions, but it exists, and it was drafted at the same time as the credit line. The room moved, or I moved, or the ground did. I would never sign that," I said, yet my initials were probably there. tidy and black, flags stuck where someone told me to. The idea that my baby's custody could be touched by a woman who treated compassion like a performance made my blood turn to frost. "We'll challenge it," Thomas said, "but you need to prepare for a fight." I didn't sleep. I sat on the porch until the sky faded from bruise to milk. At sunrise, Grandpa came out and handed me a folded sheet of paper. It was from a ledger I'd never seen. His handwriting, square, patient, filled the lines. "Your mother's story is not as tidy as we made it," he said. "We should have told you sooner, or different, or braver." He told me my mother had disappeared for 5 months when she was 19, and returned with me in a silence that stayed for 2 decades. He told me the name on my birth certificate, the father's name, had always been an echo, never a person. He told me they had tried, back then, to handle things privately, which meant they were poor and proud, and unwilling to let the town turn me into an exhibit. I had spent so long constructing myself out of other people's certainty that I had forgotten how to stand without it. Now, everything tilted. If my origin story had been curated, how much else had been arranged to keep me docile? Callum's easy answers, Elaine's generational money, my own willingness to sign whatever smoothed the path. That was the language of control. I said to my baby, "We will speak a different language." She turned as if to say, "Then teach me." A thick envelope arrived addressed to occupant. Inside were glossy flyers from developers who wanted to revitalize the area into something with artisanal coffee and high ceilings. They offered fair market value for properties like ours, plus a moving stipend. "Grandma," I said, "please don't look at these." She looked anyway. "They always come courting when they smell fear," she said, voice steady. "But our walls remember our names. If you're still with me, if your chest has tightened in recognition or outrage, tell me in the comments how you learned to read a contract without closing your heart. Subscribe, because I'm not done." The fight had only just chosen its gloves, and every decision from this point would be a stitch that either held us together or split us open. But the worst was still to come. It rained like an apology the day everything broke. By late afternoon, the fields had turned to mirrors, and the old oak at the edge of the property bent like it was listening. I had gone into town to meet Thomas at the courthouse annex about an emergency filing. My belly felt heavy, low. Each step jostled a tender place inside me where fear nested. In the hallway outside the clerk's office, I saw them, Callum and Elaine, glossy as catalog models, heads together over a stack of documents. Elaine's brooch today was a silver knot. "Mara," she said, as if we were running into each other at a charity luncheon. Callum's eyes slipped past my stomach. "We're here to clarify," he said. "We want to resolve this responsibly." Thomas stepped between us, gently but like a door closing. "Any communication should go through counsel," he said. Elaine's smile cooled. "Your client's condition is relevant," she said to Thomas, not to me. "Her judgment is compromised. We have concerns about the baby's welfare given the unstable environment." The words puddled and then froze. "Say that again," I said, my voice unfamiliar to me. She rephrased it with fewer syllables and more contempt. Callum stood there, a man-shaped hesitation. "You signed the papers," he said, like a child reporting a rule he didn't write. Thomas guided me into the clerk's office. We filed what we could file. He explained softly that Elaine had resources and time and an appetite for war. "But none of that makes her right," he said. "Remember that when you're tired." I nodded and felt a wetness that wasn't rain. My water hadn't broken. Not yet, but something in me had. On the drive home, the sky went the color of old coins. A truck hydroplaned ahead of me and fishtailed back into control, and I thought, this is my life, a vehicle trying to outrun physics and somehow not dying. When I turned down the gravel road, I saw the blue SUV first, then the county car, then the man in a slicker knocking on our door with authority. I parked crooked and almost fell getting out. A social worker and a deputy, a complaint about unsafe conditions. The words hung in the entryway like a mildew smell. The social worker's eyes tried to be kind. "We have to respond when we receive a report," she said. "We just need to take a look around." Her gaze slid to my belly. I could feel my child press back against her, as if to say, "We are not your report." Grandma opened every door with dignity that could have cut glass. "Our kitchen is clean," she said. "Not curated." The social worker checked cabinets like heartbreak might hide behind canned tomatoes. She noted the crib assembling in the spare room, the the diapers stacked by the rocking chair. She touched the damp window frame and scribbled. "Old houses breathe," Grandpa said. "New ones don't. Sometimes breathing looks like a leak if you lack imagination." The deputy said nothing, eyes cataloging the life we'd built with coupons and stubbornness. They left with a brochure about parenting classes and a promise to follow up. I closed the door and slid down it. Grandma sat beside me on the floor, knees like mountains. "They were sent," she said. "Everyone's always sending someone." I knew who had sent them. The rain made the porch steps slick. I wanted to throw my voice out into the storm and have it boomerang back carrying answers. Then the power went out. Darkness in a storm turns a house into a ship. The flashlight beams cut through rain noise and memory. Grandpa coaxed the old generator awake, and it coughed to life in the barn, stuttering electricity back into the kitchen like an unreliable friend. The refrigerator hummed. The radio sputtered and then found a station playing a song my mother loved. The lights flickered. The baby kicked. My body clenched with a pain that made my name leave me. "Contractions," Grandma said, world narrowing to essential nouns. She started timing with the calm of a woman who has ferried people across dangerous rivers and dares them to notice her paddling. The pains came like waves with teeth. Thomas called. He had news about the filings, but my breath turned the phone into a useless rectangle. Water broke, warm and unstoppable, making proof on the kitchen floor that life does not wait for paperwork. The road into town was flooding. The bridge might be closed. The dispatcher's voice on the phone was practical. "An ambulance is en route, but response times are delayed. Do you have towels? Boiled water? Help?" We had both, and we had each other. The storm pressed its forehead against the windows and listened to me learn a new language, one made of sound and leave-taking and 1,000 unpracticed prayers. Between contractions, Grandma whispered into my hair, "Your mother gave birth in this house too." She told me how my arrival had been a quiet miracle in a noisy world, how my mother had wept not from pain, but from the sudden abundance of something she was sure she'd run out of. Love that defied ledger lines and legal threats, and mothers-in-law with knives for tongues. "You come from survivors," Grandma said. "You come from women who bleed and then build." There was a truck in the driveway. Headlights cut through the rain like judges. Callum burst in, hair soaked, eyes wide with a half-useful panic. Elaine followed, composed even as thunder argued with itself overhead. "I got your messages," Callum said, as if this were a normal social call. "I want to be here." Lightning turned his face into a negative. "No," I said, another contraction arching my back. "You want to look like you were here." Elaine produced a folder as if delivering monogrammed napkins. "We need to discuss consent," she said. "If you become incapacitated..." Grandma stepped between us, a small woman who took up the whole doorway. "Get out," she said, voice a quiet knife. "You will not use her pain as a contract negotiation." Callum looked at me with something like humanity trying to remember itself. "I'm sorry," he said, and for a second, I believed him. Then he added, "But my mother," and I learned the difference between a man and a boy wearing a man's suit. The next contraction knocked language out of me. I howled. The storm howled back. The ambulance finally arrived, tires hissing against wet gravel. A paramedic with patient hands and a tattoo of a lighthouse on his forearm coached my breathing. "Look at me," he said, "one breath at a time. You've got this." We loaded into the back, and the siren became a promise that someone else would carry us for a few miles. Elaine tried to climb in. The paramedic held up a hand like a gate. "Family only," he said. "I am family," she said. "Not tonight," Grandma answered. In the fluorescent honesty of the hospital, the world boiled down. Contraction, breath, push, pause. Faces changed above the mask line, but eyes stayed kind. A nurse named Joy, could a name be more on the nose and still be true, held my hand and said, "You can. You are." The baby crowned. She slid into the world furious and pink and perfect, her cry slicing the room open and sewing it closed again in the same instant. They put her on my chest, and all the storms I'd ever known made sense. They exist to make way for this. I named her Rowan, for the tree that bends and doesn't break, that grows berries birds love, that people used to plant by doors to keep storms away. She blinked at me with ancient, unafraid eyes. I promised her out loud that I would not sign anything that hurt us, not even if it came wrapped in roses. I promised her that our home would be a verb we practiced every day, not a noun with a mortgage. When I looked up, Callum stood at the glass, separated by rules and the choices that lead to them. He raised his hand. I did not raise mine. The social worker from before appeared in the doorway, a new file in her hand. We received a second report, she said cautiously, but it was withdrawn by the complainant. I knew whose attorney had made that call and why. Optics. Then Thomas arrived, damp and triumphant. A judge signed the temporary order, he said, waving a paper like a flag. The collateral claim is stayed pending review. The guardianship designation is void unless you affirm it, which you will not. We bought time. Time is the currency of survival. He handed me a pen, and I signed statements that said I was awake now. But this was a climax, not a conclusion. Because as Rowan's tiny fist curled around my finger, Grandma's phone buzzed with a message from a neighbor. A picture of a posted notice on our front fence. A notice from the developer, not the bank. Intent to survey. In the corner, a hand we recognized had written a note. Thought you'd want to know. The neighbor added, they came at dusk. Even in the bright, clean smell of the maternity ward, the fight was waiting on our porch like weather you couldn't outrun. I kissed Rowan's forehead and tasted salt and electricity. I imagined the farmhouse breathing, old wood whispering, hold. I imagined the land itself saying, choose. But the worst was still to come. We went home 2 days later to a sky polished blue by the storm's exit. The gravel sang under the tires. The porch steps were slick with dried mud prints from too many feet. The notice flapped on the fence like a dare. I carried Rowan across the threshold and felt the house rearrange around us, making space like bread dough rising under a damp towel. The developer's representative arrived in a charcoal suit and statements disguised as questions. Have you considered the benefits? He asked, gesturing toward a brochure that showed a version of our land with yoga decks. Have you considered minding your own? Grandma said, sweet as pie, sharp as lemon. He made notes on a tablet. You'll hear from us, he said. We already have, Grandpa replied. Over the next weeks, the fight didn't end. It changed shape. The bank's stay wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door propped open. Thomas taught me to ask for paper, not promises. I became a woman who reads the fine print with a highlighter and a prayer. Rowan learned the rhythm of the house, the creak before the kettle boils, the late afternoon light that gilds the kitchen table like an apology. She slept on my chest while I called agencies, while I filed forms, while I learned to speak fluent persistence. Then came the plot twist I hadn't planned but should have expected. The second envelope from the law firm contained not a threat, but a letter from the notary. She had resigned her commission after an investigation found she'd notarized documents she hadn't properly witnessed. A list of cases was attached. My name was there. The credit line and guardianship designation were both flagged for review, due to procedural irregularities. Thomas exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath underwater too long. This blows a hole in their boat, he said. It doesn't sink it, but it lists it. We filed more motions. Elaine's attorney attempted to spin. Callum sent an email, long, sad, strategically apologetic, about getting in over his head, about expectations, about needing to protect my family's reputation. I learned to recognize the particular stink of a non-apology dressed as confession. I wrote back a sentence I will teach Rowan to use whenever necessary. I accept your regret. I do not accept your rewrite. The social worker returned, minus the deputy, carrying a soft-sided bag and a smile that reached her eyes this time. She asked how Rowan was sleeping. She admired the sturdy crib Grandpa had sanded until it gleamed. She watched me change a diaper without offering commentary. We're closing the file, she said, and the house exhaled. When she left, Grandma slid a cookie tin onto the table. Inside were not cookies, but documents. The deed, the tax receipts, letters she had written to herself over the years and never mailed, reminding future Lila not to panic, instructing future Walter to check the fence posts after a storm. Our real inheritance, she said, tapping the papers, is how we look out for each other. But the developers didn't stop courting. They offered more money. They sent a man who'd grown up with my mother and said, "It's progress. Progress is a word wielded like a crowbar by people who won't have to live with the damage." We said no, and then we said no again, and then we said no in writing, which is the only no that echoes in the halls where decisions are made. We put a sign on the fence, "Not for sale." Beneath it, in smaller letters, "We remember who we are." In the quiet hours, when the baby's breath measured the night and my mind wanted to tally every risk, I made a different list. I wrote down every woman who had handed me something when I had nothing. The stranger with crackers, the nurse with lighthouse eyes, the neighbor who texted the notice, the clerk who slipped a resource list across the counter like a secret. I wrote down every time I had believed I couldn't and did anyway. I wrote a note to the girl I used to be. You didn't fail. You graduated from illusions. If you've walked with me all this way, if you felt the floor tilt and taught yourself to stand anyway, I want you here. Not as spectators, as sisters. Subscribe so this isn't the last time we meet in this kitchen where stubbornness smells like cinnamon. Comment where you're watching from. Tell me your storm. Tell me your porch light. Tell me the moment you realized the door you needed to walk through was back to yourself. I read every single one. I answer when I can. Sometimes I just sit with you and hold the silence so it stops feeling like a threat. Here is the lesson my house taught me. Security isn't paperwork. It's people. It's the way hands you trust catch what you drop. It's the boundary that says, you may not enter with your boots on my heart. It's learning to call a threat by its name and a blessing by its work. It's the child on your chest whose small weight reorders your gravity. It's choosing truth even when it costs more than lies. There will be more letters. There will be more men in suits. There will be days when the roof needs patching and the well pump sulks. There will be mornings when grief is a film I have to wash off with coffee and resolve. But there will also be Rowan's laugh, shaped like bells. There will be Grandpa's radio finding Sinatra out of static. There will be Grandma's bread rising, and the fences checked after storms, and the floorboards singing our names when we cross them. There will be the way the sunset gets stuck on the orchard and refuses to move until someone thanks it. Most of all, there will be me. No longer a woman who signs to be loved, but a woman who reads, questions, refuses, negotiates, and loves anyway. A woman who places her baby in a bassinet built by a man with calloused hands and says, "You were born in a storm, my love. That's why you'll never fear the wind." If this story met you where you are, subscribe. Share it with the friend who thinks she can't. Comment the city that's holding you, the kitchen light that keeps you brave. Come back for the next chapter, because I'm not done, and neither are you. We are building a ledger of our own now, full of names and nights and no's that save us. And if you're wondering whether the worst is still to come, here's what I've learned. The worst is only what we call the part right before we remember our power, but the worst was still to come, and then we decided it wasn't.